Uh, sorry. Basically, what that means is that people come to me when they've got an issue, but beyond that, I also do tech support for technicians such as yourself. Our shop does a lot of the pre-sale setups on our pro and custom woodwinds, and we do a lot of repair on instruments that have gone out on loan and come back. So it's a pretty wide job. I also do things like this, talking to schools, giving clinics. I'm involved with NAPERT. I'm on your school committee. I'm also on the Red Wing committee. So my job is a little bit strange. I wear a lot of hats. I got into the industry after college. I have an Oboe performance degree, and I thought, well, maybe I should do something that I could use to feed myself, and have a general life outside of work. Um, what led me to repair is kind of a multi-tiered thing. In high school, I had a really bad experience, with an oboe that didn't work. My mom bought me what we thought was a pretty good intermediate oboe, only to come to find out later that it was not a respectable brand, even though the store we got it from had said it was in fine working order, and they continually told me that it was fine, and I knew it wasn't fine. And then my junior year, I got a Fox, and all of a sudden, I started blossoming as a player. And so I realized in high school that the equipment is just as important as the practice. And then in college, I met a woman named Heidi when I was working for a summer up at Interlochen, and she fixed my oboe. It was something I thought was really complicated. She got it done in 10 minutes, and we chatted for like 3 hours about repair. And then 2 weeks before one of my recitals, I honestly can't remember if it was my junior or senior recital, something broke on my oboe. It had to do with the E flat on the lower joint. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I took it to a local spot in the town I was in for college, and they succeeded in taking what was a minor issue and turning it into a catastrophic problem. Um, Tears were shed, words were said, and after my oboe professor got on the line with the repair shop, we finally got it all worked out. But all of these things kind of led me to repair. Um, and since joining the industry, I have really loved working on oboes, but it always surprises me to find out that not many other technicians share that enthusiasm, including my husband, who goes out of his way to avoid working on oboes, and that shocks me every time. So what I developed this clinic for was a really rudimentary it's supposed to be a beginner's guide or an idiot's guide to approaching the oboe. So I think it's really good for students, since Jessica told me that you guys haven't really been going over the oboe yet. I think she said that you've basically just taken them apart. Is that correct? Okay. So hopefully this won't be too much to digest, but if it is, just let me know and we can try to go into it a little bit. I'm also going to make the deck available to Jessica, so you guys can kind of have it, and reference back to it. All right. Any questions about me, Yamaha, or before we get going on this train? No?
You might want to explain interlocking for the students that don't know what that is.
Oh, well, Interlochen itself is actually a school, located in Interlochen, Michigan, but every summer they have, a music camp for really advanced students. Boy, is that a kick in the ego, when you go there as a college student and some of the high school students are frankly better players than you. Great. Another reason I went into repair. All right. So, does anybody have any questions about Interlochen Yamaha? No, we're all good? All right. So what we're going to go over today, we're going to go over evaluating the oboe, which is really not that much different than any other woodwind. We're going to go over my preferred pad options for the oboe, as well as the adhesives that go with them. I'm going to talk about the regulating the oboe. I think this is probably where most technicians get stuck. We'll talk about some additional key work that's found on intermediate and pro oboes. We're briefly going to talk about the play test that is in the handout we got you, and then some common complaints you might hear throughout your career and some solutions to try. Just remember, if you're getting confused about the keys, just have me slow down and reference the nomenclature pages you have. Okay, so evaluating. I always start with the pads. For cork pads, I check them and I replace them if they're falling out, if they're super dry and cracking, missing chunks, obviously, double seated, or if they have a really deep seat. That's kind of an interesting one because you'll probably get drag on a cork pad if it's got a deep seat, but what'll happen is you'll have phantom leaks when the seat is too deep. For skin pads on an oboe, I look for the same problems you're going to look for on any bladder skin pad. Are they torn? Are they dry, hard, falling out, double seated? And with synthetic pads, because you will find some synthetic pads in oboes, you check for delamination, an overly deep seat, just like the cork, any splaying where it kind of goes like that and it kind of splays out, warped or disfigured pads, or again, double seated. While I'm looking at that, I'm also going to look at tone holes and key cups. So with key cups, as you're checking the pads, check for issues with, dents, bends, or alignment problems with the key cups. And with the tone holes, you're looking for chips if they're unlevel or wavy. It's really important to remember that tone hole work isn't always cheap. And if you miss it on the estimate, you might be working for a place that doesn't let you change the estimate. So it's in your best interest to make sure to check for that, because it could be an expensive mistake if you forget to check the tone holes. I'm also going to check post alignment. Are the keys tight? Is there any looseness that needs to be addressed? Checking the keys for bends, rust, overly thick oil that needs to be cleaned out and replaced, just like any other woodwind instrument. Checking for key corks and bumpers. Are they missing, breaking, falling off? Are they a poor material choice? Now, we'll get back to that in just a second. And with key corks on the oboe, or really any woodwind instrument, I'm always going to assume that I'll replace 5 to 10 bumpers or silencers. If you're aiming to speed up estimates and try to kind of streamline your process, don't count how many you need to do. Just give a general idea of how many it might be. Is it 5 to 10, 10 to 15? Don't sit there and write down every key cork that needs to be replaced. Going back to poor material choice, I think it's important on a lot of woodwinds, but especially on the oboe. You got to think about material choices binding your keys. Is the material being chosen for specific areas causing binding on a connection that glides or rubs together like that? If so, you'll want to change the material to something like Teflon or something that's less grabby. You want to check your tenon corks, and then for any structural issues such as cracks or chips out of the body. Any questions? Perfect. So pretty straightforward there with the evaluating. Okay. So there are a lot of choices for pads. Two choices that are really legitimate for student oboes are skin and synthetic. Let's go over the two. The skin pads are really easy to install. They're great on stock and rentals. Skin pads compensate really well for imperfect tone holes because the felt has a lot of give, unlike cork. Skin pads are heavily used by manufacturers of student line instruments, but they're most helpful on the larger pads at the bottom of the instrument. So even like some higher end oboes will still use skin pads, or even some leather pads on the big pads like the C, the B, and the B flat. For skin pads, there's a lot of pads out there marketed as piccolo and oboe pads. These are not my favorite to use on the oboe. They're really soft, and I don't like how they feel on an oboe. So I actually prefer a thin clarinet pad with a nice firm felt over the pads that are meant for oboes. They're slightly less forgiving, but they feel better for the player. When I was in a regular retail shop, I used the Kraus 101 Ps for this purpose. So on synthetic pads, I don't feel that synthetic pads should be used everywhere on the oboe, but they do work really well on the trill keys. So if you look at your nomenclature page, it's the D trill key and C sharp trill key on the upper joint. They also work pretty well on the C and B flat keys, although I don't use them in those locations. I use all cork on the stack pads. I should mention that if you're going to use synthetic or cork pads, or really if you're going to do any work on an oboe at all, you're going to want to have a key cup heater or a split tip soldering gun that's been modified, because you really don't want to take a flame to these. The key work is so low that you'll end up damaging the body. It's also possible, specifically with synthetic keys, the flame, even if you're really careful with it, it oftentimes will warp a synthetic pad. Good things about synthetics are that they're relatively quick to install. They aren't quite as forgiving as skin, but they often outlast skin pads. Like I said earlier, but I didn't put on the deck, is that another option is white leather pads, but they're really only appropriate on the C, B, and B flat. Howarth's, they use them even on their highest end oboes. Finally, a final note on pad selection for skin and synthetic is that you don't want to use these on your octave keys. The metal tone holes are just going to destroy them super fast, and they don't feel good in those locations anyway for an oboe player. Okay, so I think cork pads are amazing, so let's talk about them. They are much better at sealing a tone hole, and they feel really great to oboe players, and they almost always last longer than any other pad available. They just, I mean, who's the oboe? I'm sorry, which one of you guys is an oboe player? Was it?
Derek.
Derek.
I am.
Yeah, so you know how like on an oboe, unlike other wind instruments, it feels so firm when it's nice and tight, and that's cork pads. You don't feel that on a student line that has skin pads on the stack keys. So it's all about the fact that the venting is so low. You have to have that extra nice plant feel that is just not super necessary for like clarinet and saxophone players. Skin is totally fine to use on student line instruments, but I do often convert student oboes to cork on the stack pads, again, because it feels better. However, a side note, I'm not actually taking perfectly good skin pads off and replacing them with cork. It's when they fall out or tear or are just too old to function, I'll stick in a cork pad, because I've noticed that, particularly with Yamaha oboes, not even kidding, I'm not pandering, the tone holes are they're good enough as is on the Yamahas in almost every situation to take the cork. Although I do like cork pads, there are some major drawbacks to cork pads. There are extra steps to pad it, and you can't use them on anything less than a perfect tone hole. One last note, even on student line oboes, corks must be used on aperture keys. Do we know what an aperture key is?
No.
So it's pretty much any key with a hole in it. I've seen people use synthetics with a hole in it. I've seen people use skin with a hole in it, and I'm sorry, they just don't work as well. I always go for cork. That's a personal opinion. I think you'll probably find that to be similar if you end up working on a lot of oboes. But it is necessary, I think, to use cork on those. And finally, if you do end up working on a lot of oboes, you might find that some oboe manufacturers, particularly on older oboes, if you look on your oboe nomenclature upper joint, the G sharp key, a lot of times manufacturers make that tone hole almost as big as the key cup, which is super hard to deal with when you're trying to use cork pads. So what I do for those is I'll spin a step like a clarinet pad into it, so I can use an oversized cork pad. Does that make sense? So like, I think I have a
question. I think I
Sure.
misunderstood when you said about the cork pads and the aperture key. Did you say they can or cannot be used in aperture keys?
You should use cork anytime there's a hole in the key on an oboe. I realize that that's not the case for things like flute.
Of course. Yes. Okay, I understand. I misheard.
Yeah. No problem. I think it's because of the size of the tone hole, the smallness of the tone holes, and where how the oboe is vented, the cork just feels better. It's not mushy. You're not going to have to like press extra hard to get it to work. And I find that the cork is actually, if you do your prep work, it's easier to get to seat properly on oboe aperture pads. But good question. Does anybody else have any questions at this point?
We have
Yeah, one
another
more. What I missed what you said about the register key. Was that one that you don't use? You don't use synthetic on that. You do use.
I don't use synthetic, or I don't use anything but cork on the so the A octave, the G octave, and the third octave should all have cork.
A, G, and
Yeah, so all oboes have 2 octave keys. Some higher end oboes are going to have a 3rd octave key.
okay.
Thank you.
I've tried synthetics. I just find that they prematurely get damaged because it's the pip is metal. So it's gonna put a lot of extra wear on any pad because these are all sprung shut. So cork just offers a little bit more firmness. And I mean, your octave pads are taking so much abuse anyway. That's where a lot of water gets stuck on an oboe. So I just feel that the cork does a much better job, and even on student line on the octave.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
Are there like synthetic cork pads? I feel like that's something I've seen is like synthetic pads that
So-
are trying to emulate cork rather than skin.
I think what you're talking about are the Masters pads by Jeff Smith, the Valentino.
I don't know.
Masters pads.
I've seen like
So there are
cork colored.
yeah, they're
synthetic pads.
the tan
Yeah.
synthetics. The Masters pads from JL Smith are the firmest I have ever seen. I've tried them in the stack pads. I still don't like them, but I'm kind of a traditionalist when it comes to cork pads on an oboe. And maybe I'm being a little closed-minded about it. I mean, absolutely give it a try, but those pads are pretty pricey. And you're still going to have to do a lot of the prep work. And you have no control over the flatness of the pad. Whereas with an oboe, with a cork pad, you can control how flat that gets. And we'll talk about that.
Hey, Annie,
Yeah.
would you say there's a lot of tradition when it comes to, synthetic versus cork and what oboe players, we talk about like, why do we always shim flute pads in? Why won't we just glue them? And, every person I've ever asked about that is like, hey, traditionally speaking, is it the same way with cork pads on oboe?
I guess you could say that, but even with flutes, I mean, have you ever tried to glue a flute pad in? It doesn't go well.
No, it doesn't.
Not only that, but I mean, one could argue that we've made a lot of advancements away from tradition when it comes to flute padding. I mean, with the advent of the Straubinger pad and the plastic shims, that totally changes the game. Yes, you're still shimming, but how you're doing it is really different. I mean, if we were talking about tradition on woodwind instruments, I mean, we'd still be using what I like to call pillow pads, where you basically just glue it in. You don't even have to level it because it's so soft. It's going to play. It doesn't matter. For good or for worse, the industry has decided that firmer pads are better across the line for woodwinds, which puts a lot of extra work on the technician. But yeah, I think on the oboe especially, there might be a little bit of the traditional, like this is how it's always been done. But that's not to say people have not really given synthetics and stuff the old college try. I mean, I've tried them. I don't like them. I don't know if that's an inherent bias or if I just don't like it. I'd like to think that if the synthetic performed as well, that I would go to it, but they just haven't. I don't like it as a player.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And we've come a long way with the technology. Like the old Valentino foam pads used to really stink
Yes.
years ago. And the glues that we use too, we've come a long way with this stuff.
Yes.
So who knows? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it's a really good discussion to have.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to remember, am I only doing this because this is how it's always been done? The only way we're going to find new and better ways to do things is by challenging tradition. So absolutely, don't take my word for it. I'm giving you what I like to do, but I've spent a lot of my career trying not to do these things. And you should too. It's absolutely legitimate to give different things a try.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any more questions? These are great. This is like the liveliest this has gone. Okay, so we've picked out our pads, so now we need to pick out an adhesive. Most of this is my preferred adhesive for any given kind of pad on an oboe, but then you'll see on the far right, we've got a please avoid. So let's talk about cork pads. I know some people are probably going to disagree with George's glue, but I really like it. I like that you don't have to get it. You get a lot of work time, which for me on a cork pad, that's really important because they're really super finicky, even when you do your prep work. It's really thick. It remains very malleable for quite a long time, and it offers a nice strong backing. Again, that just adds to the nice feel of a cork pad on a well-leveled tone hole. I do also use amber melt. I don't like it quite as much, but sometimes on the smaller pads, it works a little bit better. And it also works really well if there's not a lot of room in the pad cup. You don't want to get the cork pad too thin, but some pad cups are really, really tiny. And in that case, I'm going to use amber melt because it allows me to be a little bit more freestyle with it. Before I left my last job, I was starting to work with something called pad wax. It is stringy, but it does offer really nice results. I got it from Jeff Smith. You guys should play with it and tell me what you think. It comes in black, white, and tan, which offers you a lot of really great choices for, it's going to be really forgiving for some sins when over gluing. But like I said, I haven't had a whole lot of practice with it. So you tell me if it's any good. JL Smith. And then shellac is on there. I know people use it. I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't like it on oboes. It's just a personal preference. Shellac is something that I've kind of spent a lot of my career rejecting, and I'm actually kind of going back and being like, maybe I should give shellac more of a chance because a lot of people really like it. So obviously there's something in my own bias that says I don't like shellac. I probably got that at school from Lucas Pemberton. We'll see. All right. On skin, again, I like George's glue. Shellac is not my favorite, and I'll use amber melt as well. On synthetic, I really only use amber melt or hot melt because of the low temp. It's less likely to warp the pad. And then I always like to tell people to maybe avoid cream cement or French cement. They're really brittle. They drop pads really easily. And frankly, I don't even know where you can buy it at this point. Are there any questions about adhesive? Have you guys been? Oh, go ahead.
When you're saying amber melt and hot melt, is that like the one that's like a glue stick or?
Yeah, so hot melt glue is just, like you can get Sure Does Stick from Vogel, or at least maybe, I'm not sure if you can still get it there. Amber melt is specifically something that Jeff Smith sells. It comes in pellets and stick. I like them both ways. That's definitely a personal thing. Some people really don't like pellets. Some people swear by them. That's just work with both and figure it out. Have you guys had the opportunity to work with these different adhesives?
I think we've worked with a few. I just can't remember exactly which ones were which.
They've worked with the amber melt. Smith sells it, and Music Medic sells it. So they've had that. We've actually tried the white Euro wax from JL Smith.
Oh, the pad wax?
Yeah, we've tried
That
it.
stuff is crazy.
It's weird.
I don't know if I like it. I kind of do, but it's hard to work with.
Yeah,
But
because
it offers really nice results.
takes forever to firm up. I would never use it like on a saxophone pad, but maybe like
No. It's, by the same token, I'd never use George's glue on a sax pad or a lacquered pad of any kind.
Yeah.
You have to get it too hot.
Yeah.
George's glue is really only appropriate for small pads.
Yeah.
Which all of the pads on a clarinet and all the pads on a oboe are going to be technically small pads.
It's hard to find George's glue right now. I have it in pellets. The students have gotten the pellets to work with, but I can't, like Smith hasn't had the sticks for a while. And
No, they haven't. My husband and I found that, and we actually bought some George's glue, and we bought, I think it was a silicone
mold.
Yeah, it was a silicone mold that was meant to make granola bars.
Oh my
And
God.
so we put it in the oven with the glue in there and then cut them into sticks. By the way, that was the hardest part, was cutting them into sticks. So try to get something really sharp that
Yeah.
extends the entire length, but it worked really well.
Yeah.
Because I like pellets on the amber melt, but I don't particularly like pellets on the George's glue.
Mhm.
I don't know what that's all about.
The only glue they haven't tried is the cream or the French cement.
Just
And
don't.
I used to have a stock of it at school, but I don't know anybody that still uses it. And the one place that sells it, which I think is Faree's, they want to charge. It's like $14 a stick, and
A stick? Oh
yeah,
my God.
and I can't like spend
You can't
that kind
justify
of money
that.
when I don't even see it being used out. Like when I go in shops, I'm always looking to see what glues they're using and all that stuff. Like I'm really like, I would just want to make sure that everybody gets a good experience. But like, so I still have some stubs left over of French cement, and I'm always like, if you want to try it, you can, but have
Give
fun.
it a go. Have fun.
Yeah,
Give it a year. See if it's still there.
yeah, still in the horn.
There any more questions? Oh wait, Natalie says JLS just re-released the sticks.
Nice.
So no need to buy a mold and cut it yourself. By the way, I really hurt my finger.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Okay. So cork pad prep. So we're going to check the tone holes for any chips or unevenness. If you are using cork pads and the tone holes need to, I'm reading it now straight off my notes. If you are using cork pads and the tone holes need to be addressed, there is a trick. I usually just use super glue to dress it. And there is a trick. You can use an actual needle, like a sewing needle. And if you cut off like half of the loop, you can actually dip that into the super glue, and then it creates like this well, and you just wick it across the tone hole and you'll get a nice bead. I don't have any pictures of this, and I do apologize. I like to use thin super glue for minor issues, but a thicker gel super glue if the chips are more substantial. A fun trick for super glue, because super glue dries, it cures really fast most of the time. If you take a piece of paraffin wax and put like a well in it and put your super glue in it, it won't cure for a very long time. And I didn't learn that until like 10 years into the industry. It's a great trick. Okay. If the tone hole damage is too great, or if a crack goes through the tone hole, have you guys talked about tone hole bushings?
We're going to be doing tone hole replacements at the end of April, beginning of May.
Okay, so basically, if you've got a crack or going through the tone hole, or if there's like a substantial chip that you can't build it up and take it back down, you'll have to do a tone hole replacement or a tone hole bushing. You will get into that at a later date. I think that was the most nerve-wracking thing I ever did, was cut out a tone hole. That's terrifying, because I mean, there is a point just of absolutely no return. So, okay, in the picture, you'll see some tools. This set right here is the Larry Mueller tone hole set. Now, he is actually retired and is no longer making them, but somebody said that there might be somebody that's going to be making those, but I'm not 100% sure who that is. Jessica, have you heard anything about that? Okay, Jessica's offline. And then these tools down here, I think these are from Allied and these might be from Faree, but I might have those backwards. Basically, these are for the outside of the tone hole, and these are for the inner chamfer. And then right here is actually a flute tone hole tool. It's just a piece of steel rod with a taper in it. I don't use these three tools here anymore. I always use this. It gives a really nice angle, and it's much, much gentler than these. These are so aggressive that I used to run them backwards and they were too aggressive. So I just like this. And then I don't use these anymore either. Again, they're too aggressive and I run them backwards. I almost always just go to the Larry Mueller set.
We
If-
can't
if-
quite see which ones you're pointing to.
Yeah, we can't
Oh,
see
I'm
your
sorry.
mouse. Oh wait, now
I
I
had
can.
it. I had it on the wrong thing. I'm sorry. Okay, so these are the Mueller set. There's actually 4 sizes. Well, 4 different angles with multiples, like I think 16 different sizes on each one. And then basically they're just Delrin. And you put glue or tape sandpaper into them, and these are all for the outside angle on the tone hole. These right here are also they serve the same function, but they are really, really aggressive. So I don't really use these anymore, but if I have to, I run them backwards. The same is with these. They are very, very aggressive. I never run them forwards because they'll just cut the entire thing. I would always run them backwards. And instead of these, I now use this. I think this is from the Jeff Smith flute tone hole tools. It's basically just a piece of steel with a taper on it. It's a really great taper. I don't know off the top of my head what the angle is, but again, you cut a round piece of sandpaper, you split it, and then glue it on. I would recommend any tool you use that you never go back and forth like this, that you always go in one direction. That way you know that you're getting even coverage, because no matter how hard you try, you're never going to get sandpaper to be even all the way around. So this way you know that you're not over sanding one part and undersanding another. Does that all make sense?
Yes.
Any questions?
So it sounds like, and the tools at the bottom of this picture, not the ones in the box. Are those the chamfers, or is that different? Or
chamfers are the inside.
Oh, those are the chamfers. Okay.
And again, I don't use these anymore. I just use this.
Okay.
Unless it's in an area where I can't get in with this. And frankly, if I still worked on a bench regularly, still repaired regularly, I would probably just go to a lathe and crank out a few different sizes. You can actually also make tools like this. I just don't know how. I could cut it down, but then getting the sharp edge on it, I've never done anything like that. I think Tomoji probably had something about this in his presentation to you. I mean, he's a genius. Insane.
I don't think Larry Mueller is making that set anymore either.
He's not making it, but I did hear somebody was possibly taking it over. You can make these if you have access to a lathe.
Yeah, they're
you're
not
brave.
hard to make.
They're not hard to make. You just have to know how to cut an angle accurately, an internal angle, which I mean, it's possible. I think I wish I had I meant to get the angles on them. It's 4 different, I think like 15 degrees, 20, 25, and it's not 30, it's something else.
I think it's 10. I have that set too.
Oh, it's 10? 10.
Yeah, I think it's 10, 15, 20, and 25. So
Yeah.
if you guys as students want to like measure all that, you can, if you want to like later on in life, make your own set.
Well, and if you want, he also was really great because he would put what they're generally used for. I mean, it's an amazing set. It's a shame that I think maybe somewhere like Music Medic or Jeff Smith might have bought the rights to, I don't know. But I really hope that somebody starts making them again, because I mean, who has time to make like 40 of these things? I don't. Are there any other questions? Nope. All right. Okay, prepping a cork pad. So most oboe pads are going to sit inside the cup, unlike clarinets where only the back is inside the key cup and the rest of it is outside. The exception being that G sharp we talked about, when the tone hole is almost the same size as the pad cup. For the cork pads, you're going to want to make sure your pad sources are nice and firm and do not have major imperfections on the surface. So if you buy like 10 cork pads, you might not be able to use all 10. You got to make sure that you don't have any like knots in it. Those do exist. So you select the size, firmness, and integrity. This is when you would go ahead and cut for your aperture pads. You have to cut first for the B and D before you install it. But for the other vented pads, as long as they don't have a chimney, I actually cut those out after I've already glued them in. I just find that to be easier, especially on student oboes, and especially when those student oboes are part of a rental fleet. I usually just do it not under power, and just spin my, the thing that spins. I'm losing the word. Somebody give it to me.
The circle cutter.
Your bench motor. God.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll put a drill bit in there of the correct size, and then I'll go in back, and I'll kind of put a little angle on the side that faces the tone hole. Okay, you'll want to bevel the back of the pad. I bevel all of them. Not everybody goes through the trouble, but I always do, because a beveled pad is going to give you more control. So you got to think of it like a ball bearing. If it's like this, you can only go like that. But if it's curved like that, you've got an insane amount of control over how the pad is behaving inside the pad cup. And then finally, so this is me beveling. This is a Jeff Smith pad spinner. Again, you can make these, or you can just do it by hand. You don't have to buy these tools. So you can see here, this is a beveled pad versus the unbeveled pad. Now this is not super even, as you can see, and it's not super rounded at the top. Sorry about that. I usually try to get it a little more dome shaped. And then after all this is done, I use a figure 8 method to level and smooth out the tone hole side of the pad. First by using 600 grit sandpaper to set the overall thickness and to kind of get it smooth. And then I'll move to 1,000 or even 1,500 grit sandpaper to give it a nice, smooth, finished look. Having this kind of finish is really going to reduce the risk of the pad surface keeping you from achieving a good feel. And I think I have a video. So this is just the figure 8 method. So you do it a couple times, you turn it like a quarter of a turn, do it again, quarter of a turn. Really long video, sorry about that. And so here you can see on the left is an unfinished pad, and on the right is a finished pad. So I think it's pretty clear which one of these is going to give you better results. Am I right? Last note on this, if you don't take the time to do this right, you're never going to be able to, you're never going to get your oboes to feel properly. Okay, are there any questions about that?
I have a question.
Sure.
How, in your opinion, how much of this is like making reeds?
It's so much easier than making reeds.
Really?
I hate making reeds. Just
okay.
Fun fact about me, I would buy blanks because I got so sick of making reeds. But this shouldn't take you as much time, and as long as you're picking good pads, this isn't rocket science. You know, it's it's beveling a pad and doing little figure 8s on a perfectly flat surface. It does oftentimes, if you're repadding an oboe, it can start to feel like arts and crafts, which is very much how I felt about making reeds. So maybe in that respect, it is a lot like making reeds, maybe.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Do you like making reeds? Because I think you could maybe sell me some.
I've spent more time in college making reeds than I did practicing my music.
Oh no. Oh boy, yeah.
And just one question, sorry. Oh, wait. For the sandpaper, what's the grit you said you used for that?
I start usually with about a 600 grit, and then I'll move to 1,000 or 1,500.
And you were sanding on your steel block, which is precision flat, correct?
Yes, although the steel block, I don't know if anybody noticed, the steel block in that slide is not perfect. It had some nicks in it.
I've seen people use like glass, like the same glass that you would get for like mouthpiece refacing.
Yeah, anything that is guaranteed to be an actual flat surface. Just putting it on like your kitchen table is not going to give you the same result.
I've also seen people use their cell phones because the cell phones have gotten so big, and that's Gorilla Glass. So you would assume that that's precision.
I mean, if you want to put sandpaper on your $1,000 pocket computer, that's totally up to you. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Personally. No thanks. Any other questions about that? All right. So installing the pads is not super difficult. You should have made sure at this point that the pad cup is in position over the tone hole. We've prepped the tone hole. We've prepped our cork pad or poked the hole in the skin pad if that's what you're using. Now we have to apply the adhesive, enough to allow it to float, but not so much that it's going to spill out all over the place. Then we put the key on the oboe and float the pad. Pretty easy. If you've done all your prep work, that should be about it. For skin or synthetic pads, that's it. For cork pads, although I think this is probably going to get you to where you need to be, there are sometimes some fine finishing techniques that you can implement if you are struggling to get that perfect feel.
I have a quick question. So for like when you're cutting holes in the pads and gluing them, is the glue gonna get in the aperture, or is there like a little chimney in the aperture so the pad is sitting like around it?
So on the aperture pads with the chimney, I don't have that problem. But like I said, on the aperture pads that don't actually have a chimney, I'm just gluing it like normal. So yeah, I get a lot of spill out that I clean up right away while it's still malleable. And then I'm drilling through it.
Okay.
On those though, I do kind of put the glue around, like I try to put it on the edge of the pad. Some will spill into the middle. There, you can't avoid that. And if I'm working on a really high-end oboe, I am cutting that first. I'm not drilling out a $10,000 oboe. Like I'm not doing that. This is strictly on like I got to get 25 of these things done by the end of the day. Rental fleet stuff that you'll come to really love. Just remember, if you're working in retail, in a retail repair shop, you're going to hate your rental fleet, but it's what's keeping the doors open. So don't ignore it until May. It's not worth it. Get that stuff done as it comes in. That's just an aside. That's not oboe specific. Did I answer the
Thank
question?
you.
I forget what the original question was.
Well, I guess it's also, so maybe I just don't know how like oboe keys are specifically like made. I just sort of like made up what part of my question, just assuming thing. So like some of the keys is like do some of the keys like have a chimney through that aperture, or is the
Yeah.
aperture, so some of them have a chimney and then some of them are just holes in a key cup?
Yeah, so your B key, okay, so if you look at your upper joint nomenclature, I'm really sorry, I wish I had an actual oboe with me. The B key that has the diamond in it, that's always going to have a chimney.
Okay.
Additionally, on the lower joint, your donut key, the D donut key, is always going to have a chimney. And I believe the E key usually has a chimney as well. But the two, the A and the G on your upper joint, many times they don't have, many times they do not have a chimney.
Okay.
So to make it easier to work on student lines, particularly when I'm trying to get through a lot of rentals, I'm going to skip that part of pre-drilling. It takes up, it doesn't seem like a lot of time saved, but when you're working on a bunch of them, it's actually quite a lot of time saved.
Okay.
Not that you have to
Yeah, I get
replace
it.
them all the time.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So fine finishing. So when I'm working on any clarinet, oboe, or piccolo, I'm using the ultra thin sealer material from J.L. Smith, the 0.0005, half thousandth of an inch. For skin and synthetic, all I really do is float and manipulate the pad as you would on a clarinet. On these, you can go ahead and add a very light seep if you'd like to. For cork pads, excuse me, if you're unable to get even coverage, you can use fine sandpaper strips to lightly sand the pad face to match the tone hole. So what that means is if this is my pad and this is my tone hole, I'm putting the sandpaper facing up towards the pad, not the tone hole, and gently pulling it out as straight as you can. Now, it's a pretty old school technique. It is one that some manufacturers still use. The issue I have with this method is that you can really easily screw up your entire pad, and then you'll have to start from square one, and that's always super fun. but sometimes there's no other choice. It might be that you didn't get the tone hole quite level enough. It might be that the pad is just slightly wonky. And you know, hopefully it's easier to just go in with a little bit of sandpaper, but just know if you're off, if you accidentally pull up instead of straight out or down instead of straight out, then you're only sanding certain parts of the pad and not the whole thing. So another thing you can try to do is the pencil trick if you can't really find the leak. It's basically just to help identify where the leak is. You color a piece of cigarette paper, or Yamaha actually makes something called pad paper. It works really, it's basically like cigarette pad. And with the pencil mark facing the pad again, you lightly pull it through, and then you take the key off and look and see where the pencil mark is and isn't. And you actually, you have to by hand kind of shave off areas where the pencil mark is. Again, that's not, I don't use that method because I've screwed that up so many times. I don't know. Maybe I'm not delicate enough to do that. I can't do it. If I find myself having to fine finish, I'm almost always taking the pad out and figuring out where I went wrong. Or in a desperate attempt to try and get the instrument done, I'll sometimes use sandpaper. For cork pads, I do not put a seat in the pad like I would with skin or leather. And you should never, you know how like sometimes you're working on a pad and you're getting frustrated, so you might block one side and tweak down the other side. Don't ever do that on a cork pad. That will not come back out and you will ruin the cork pad. Make sense? Okay, so now is a good time to get any questions in about anything we've talked about. No, we're all good? Okay.
Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you float? Like you heat up the key cup and float the cork pad?
Yeah, I mean, that's always what I do. But if you've done that and you keep chasing your tail and like you're really close, but not quite there, is when I would use maybe the other methods I mentioned. But yeah, I'm always floating. I float all oboe pads.
Great. What grit sandpaper, if you were doing that first option under the cork padding? So
Like 1500.
1500. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't go crazy and use like 600, maybe 1000, but I am basically using the finest sandpaper I can find,
Got you.
which is usually 1500.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. All right, so don't be scared. Student lines really aren't that hard to regulate. There's not that much going on. So regulation, again, is pretty much where most techs get really nervous. You just want to approach oboe regulation methodically. You find your routine and you stick to it. I find it easiest to focus on each joint separately before bringing them together. So my method is upper joint, lower joint, and then putting them together, unless there's a bell key, in which case I'll do upper joint, lower joint, bell to lower, and then lower and upper. We're not going to talk too much about venting on the oboe, other than that it's generally lower on the oboe. But as far as how low, that really depends on the manufacturer. Okay. So on the upper joint, we'll start pretty easy with the A and G octave. On this one, the venting should be across the board about 1/32 of an inch. And the A octave arm cannot touch the body. So in this picture, you can see this is the G octave or lower octave, and this is the A octave or upper octave. So if you follow back here, this little foot is part of the A octave. If that is touching the body, which it oftentimes is because stuff gets bent on a student line oboe, then this pad is not going to be touching its tone hole. If this is touching the body, then the pad is not the first thing touching. That makes sense? Okay. And then it's important to know that there should be no lost motion in this mechanism. So next is going to be a video, and I'll try to explain it as we go. So I'm pushing down on the thumb octave and then engaging the A octave, and you can see that there's no lost motion. Here, let's see if we can watch that again. you see there's no lost motion in the entire mechanism. So when the G octave touch piece hits the body, it should also be touching the G octave key, and the G octave key should be touching the A octave. And that way, when you engage the A octave, which is on the left side of the instrument, you can't see it, then there will be no lost motion. Make sense? Now, in order to start regulating the upper stack, you have to block open the B flat C upper bridge rocker. You can see that at the bottom left of the upper joint nomenclature. If you don't do this, your C and B flat key aren't going to open, and so you won't be able to regulate anything. You can also just take that key off. It's super easy. You don't have to take anything else off to get it out. I like to use leather, but I've used things like paper folded up, or even the little sleeve for razor blades. Okay, so we're going to start by actually undoing this screw right here. I didn't put it in the slide, but this is the C, this is the C, this is the B flat. These are regulated together, but they are not engaged by physically touching either one. So you want to start by undoing this so the C does not confuse anything with the B flat. Does that make sense? Now, this is a step I now skip, but it's really important when you're first learning to make sure that this screw is undone, and it is the screw between the C and the B flat. And then what we're going to start with, this is the G key, this is the B flat key, and we're going to start by regulating these two. Now, we are working with the assumption that all pads are level. So you turn this screw. If you're trying to close the B flat, you're going to turn it in. If the B flat is closing too soon, you unscrew it. It's pretty simple. You've probably worked on screwed regulations on some saxophones, or have you? Flutes?
Flute.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense?
I think so. And we also have this other chart that has like that Jessica gave us with adjustment screw numbers on it that might.
I don't have that.
I think it's either our number 1 or 2. I'm not sure. In case anyone else has that and does know which one that is. Derek, I don't know if you have that one.
Jessica, I'd love that diagram.
Sure. I just photocopied it out of the Thorpe manual, just so they had before I got your handouts today, I was like, well, at the very least, we'll have that. But those of you that are on your computers too, Annie sent a handout that I emailed to you at 12:05.
Sorry, that's my fault. I
No,
should have gotten it to you in time to print them out.
No worries.
Alicia, you still look a little bit confused.
It'll be fine.
Okay.
Keep going.
Alrighty. So next we'll do the C to A adjustment. So this is the C, this is the A. The C on almost every oboe I've ever worked on has 2 screws. You just have to follow the mechanism to find which screw you're supposed to be working on. It'll be really clear which one is connected to the B flat right here and which one is connected to the C. So again, it's just like regulating anything else. As long as you've got pads that are seating properly, it should just be a matter of matching the feel of the drag. And on both of the regulations we've talked about, you need to have even coverage on all of it. And now this is where we go back and we're going to go ahead and adjust that screw that we undid at the beginning between the B flat and the C. Again, the screw is going to be located on the C key and it's going to be engaging with the B flat key. Then you're going to check it. You can't see the key here, but you're going to check it by engaging the G key and checking that everything here has even coverage, all 3 pads. Do you understand why, when you're first starting out on oboes, why it would be important to make sure that the C is not getting in the way of the B flat to G regulation? It's to help prevent a headache. Now, At this point in my career, I do not do this. I actually regulate the B flat to C first. And then I'll bring in the other one. I'll bring in the G. That's just a personal preference. I don't have an issue with it now, but I've been doing this for a long time. But until you get to a point where you don't need to do this, I would strongly recommend you stick with the routine I'm going over. And then again, even closure on all 3 pads here. So that's actually pretty much it on the upper joint until we get to putting the joints together. Do I have any questions on the upper joint so far? All right, cool. So lower joint lost motion. There are a couple of points of really important lost motion we need to talk about. So right E flat lever to E flat key, and this is where I really wish we were in person and I wish I had an actual oboe. So if you look on your nomenclature, it's upside down, you'll see on the right side, your E flat key is about 2/3 of the way down. And then the E flat lever is there at the top. It's the farthest to the left on your pinkies. There has to be lost motion in that mechanism. Otherwise, you're going to prop open your E flat. By the way, I'm pretty sure that was what was wrong with my oboe in college, that the guy screwed up. Fun little tidbit.
Just a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you want me to get out my oboe so you can have it to show along?
Do you have teleportation? Can you teleport it to me?
I wish. Sorry.
You can, if we think that'll be helpful. Always worth it. I meant to bring my oboe today and I didn't. Fun fact, my oboe is not regulated. I have to work on it. More points of lost motion: left E flat lever and low B flat connecting lever, low B flat connecting lever, bridge and low B flat bell key, banana key to low C arm, and left F lever to F key. So the whole thing about going through that fast is that we don't need to worry about this for student line instruments. We're going to kind of go over that a little bit later. So now we're going to regulate the lower stack. We're going to start with the F bis. So if you look on there, it's this one right here. Sorry, I keep forgetting I can do this. The F bis to E. The F bis is another one that it's going to have 2 screws. The first one from the top is going to be to the E, and then the second one is going to be down here to the D. The F bis to E has to have even coverage. And then you do the F bis to D adjustment, and again, it's even coverage. This is the D, this is the F bis, even coverage. Got that? Okay, so for the next part, we're going to be bringing in the C key here, but it's really important. Again, we need to unscrew the E flat to C screw. Again, it's so we can make sure that the next set of regulations aren't giving us false readings. Okay, so now we have the C. So this is the C pad cup right here, and if you follow the key back, you can see right here that it connects to actually the E. So if you follow the E, you can see that it's got this connecting bar, and then there's another part of the key over here with a little foot that comes out to meet that screw. I'm sorry I don't have a better picture of that, but maybe Derek can show you when you guys are back in class. So this is kind of an unusual regulation on the oboe because it is imperative that you have uneven coverage and that your C closes just a little bit more than your E and F bis. If you don't do that, you can cause problems later on. So this is pretty much the only one where you do not want even coverage. Make sure your C is planting just slightly harder than the F bis and E. But you do need to have some drag here. It's probably one of the more interesting regulations on the oboe. Okay, so the E flat to C adjustment, it's even coverage between the C and the E flat. What makes this complicated is checking your work. I place the joint on a bench and I use my pinky, you can see, to engage the E flat and then my pointer finger to engage the C, and then the closer should be even between the two. And then you want to make sure that the C to E is still correct. So I think there's a video of this. Oh, yeah, with the left hand, sorry. This is the end of the lower joint regulations for student instruments. The last thing I do before bringing the joints together is check for lost motion. Okay, so yeah, there should be no lost motion here. So with the E flat held down, I engage the C sharp, which is this middle key right here. And then from that one point of action, your C, E flat, E, and F bis are all going to close at the same time with no lost motion. So there is a video of that. So quite a lot going on there. Do we want to see that again? So again, with the E flat engaged, I'm pressing the C sharp, and there should be no lost motion there. Okay. So that's it for the lower joint by itself. Do we have any questions? Nope. Okay. Oh,
I was gonna say lots of questions, but you should keep going. So I think.
okay. So with the joints together, there should be lost motion between both bridges. I think I have 2 videos of it, but it's going to be really minor lost motion here between your bridge and your F sharp, and then here on your trill keys. You can adjust this like you normally would, just by shaving or adding more cork. Or up here, you've got an adjustment screw on a lot of them, but not all of them, but a lot of student lines will have an adjustment screw here that you can just turn down, like turn in, to get just a little bit of lost motion. So you can see that it's really minor, but this is to make sure that your C and B flat keys on your upper joint are closed. And then here you can see just a little bit of lost motion here on your trill keys. Make sense? Cool. Okay. The next one to check is your F sharp trill arm to G sharp. So this thing right here gets bent all the time, especially on student line instruments. So the first thing, obviously we'll go back a second. If this is the complaint, like my instrument doesn't play when I use my right hand, this is almost always why that's happening. If this has gotten bent so much and there's a cork pad here, you might as well just estimate for a cork pad replacement, because good luck getting that unbent and getting this seated properly. Sometimes you get lucky, but just estimate for that pad anyway. There should be even coverage here. It's really important for some of the alternate fingerings. We won't get too much into that, but just know that if this isn't closing, you're going to screw somebody up during a fast passage. So even coverage. So, okay, that was it for student line instruments altogether. And this next section is going to be kind of about intermediate and pro. Before we do that, are there any questions just about student line instruments? And do we need to stand up and stretch?
I've got a short one about oboes in general.
Yeah.
I know that some of the keys have those little plates almost on the sides of them. I know the top one has that from middle D. Why do some
You're
of the other
talking about
keys have-
this one here
Yeah.
and this down here?
Yeah, I know why the one on top, but I don't
Yeah,
know
the
why
half hole. Oh, that's just because oboes, the key spacing is pretty wide.
for the finger spread.
Yeah, it basically, I've noticed in my own playing, I always play really hard to right here. I never cover this fully.
Okay.
And it's because I have short fingers. I'm pretty sure that's the only reason that's there. I
Okay.
haven't heard anybody say any differently. Good question, but I'm almost positive that's why it's there.
That's
Can
what I
anybody-
figured, but
Yeah. It's really hard, especially for little kids with little hands to spread their fingers out. Bassoons are worse. I don't know how bassoonists do it. Okay, so that's so extra. Intermediate and pro line oboes have several additional mechanisms, and therefore they have a little bit more to do. And I think, student lines are not too hard once you get your routine down. I will say that professional line oboes are more confusing. They've got a lot more going on. We're going to talk about the added mechanisms, but if you haven't mastered student line oboes, please do not attempt to work on the pro line stuff. Dabble first with the intermediate. Okay, so on a lot of high-end oboes, you're going to have a third octave. It should barely open. It's usually controlled by a screw, although I've seen some that aren't. And the lever is over your lower octave lever, but they should not touch. The third octave key does not engage anything but itself. So if it's touching your G octave lever, then you've got a problem that needs to be addressed first. So there should be a video here of it just barely opening. Now, I think the only time I've ever really used the third octave key on my oboe is during the Poulenc sonata, because I just could not get my high F out. But in a lot of ways, the third octave key for really accomplished players isn't super necessary, and it's just one more place for the oboe to correct. But you are going to run into them if you work on a lot of oboes. I'm sorry, when I was putting this together, I must have been really tired with these transitions because they're just getting silly now. All right, so the A flat, B flat trill lever. Now, this is not something I generally use. It's really just an alternate key. When engaged, it's going to open your G sharp and it's not alternate, just a trill. You use it mostly for trilling. It's going to open your G sharp and close G and A through the A flat, B flat connecting lever. If you look at your nomenclature, your upper joint nomenclature, it's kind of down at the bottom on the right. It's just this extra piece of mechanism. And like I said, I don't really use this. How often do you use it, Derek?
Never. My oboe doesn't even have one. My grandmother's oboe, she just screwed it shut and is like, don't ever use it.
I think I've used it like twice for, I think, just trilling. So here's just a quick video of it. You kind of see when you push it down, it's closing your G sharp, or yeah, okay. Watch that again.
I think that's the key that when my brother was showing me his oboe, and I was like, what does this key do? He was like, I don't even know.
Absolutely nothing. Oh, it just gives players more to get around and technicians more headaches. So the D trill lever, this is just another option for your D trill that doesn't exist on a student line. It's not complicated, but it does add to your compound key here. You can see that these are screwed together. Basically, this just makes giving this a COA more annoying when you have to take it apart and try to get it back together. By the way, if somebody figures out a really great way to get these to line up and go in easily, just let me know, because I still haven't figured it out. These things are a pain in the butt to get together. Okay, so this mechanism is probably the mechanism that gets a lot of people confused. It's super confusing. The F resonance key, it adds another key, another pad, as well as a rocking mechanism. So let's try to break this down. So at rest on the oboe, the F res is going to be fully closed and it's controlled by the D screw. That closure is controlled by the D screw. Not to confuse you, but on an English horn, it's the opposite. On an English horn, the F res is at rest is open. So don't let that fool you, because it did fool me and I play this stupid thing. So you can see here that it's closed and it is being controlled in its closure by the D screw. Make sense so far? So this should close nice and firm. There should be no question as to whether or not this sucker is closed. So when you hold D, you engage your E and adjust the E to F res screw to set the regulation. The adjustments made, okay, so when you do this adjustment, you're going to do it after you do the rest of the upper stack, but before you do the C to E regulation. Does that make sense? So where it fits into the routine. Before you move on to the C regulation, you're going to do the F res regulation. And again, don't worry too much about these extra mechanisms. So here you can see I'm pressing D and it's opening it. And then with that held down, you press the E. Shoot. You can kind of see how it works. So pressing D and now I'm pressing E to close it. So with D down to regulate it, with D down, it's going to open it. You're going to press down E and then you'll use your feeler gauge to set the regulation. Does that make sense? So you actually have to engage it with D and then use E. So it's the full finger situation. You got to use both hands to get this to work. Oh, we didn't even get to finish it. I'll just let you watch it. So does everybody, this is the most confusing thing on a professional oboe. Does everybody understand what just happened? And
Quick
how that,
question.
yeah.
So aside from like the regulation point, what is the function of this key? Does it go down when you're pressing F taco? Is it just like resonance fingering on clarinet? Like what exactly does this key do?
It improves some notes. You don't
It
really
goes-
need to worry about that.
Okay.
Not right now,
I am,
anyway. Basically, it's just a huge headache for a poor technician who doesn't really understand how it works. But just know that you set at rest, it is set by the D screw, and the regulation is set by the E screw. And it's really important to follow the mechanism to know which screw is doing what. We won't even talk about how different this is than the English part. Okay, so then you've got the donut key. You see right here, it looks like a donut, very delicious. The left hand E flat right here closes the donut key. The donut key should not close before the E flat hits the C closing arm. Does that make sense? So the E flat closing arm is over here, and it should hit before this hits the body. Does that make sense? Let's watch the video. So E engaged. You can see it is, with this mechanism here, it is closing the donut. Okay. Another regulation is B to C sharp. This is another regulation that if you get it wrong, you're going to screw up some alternate fingerings. There needs to be exact equal coverage between the B and the C sharp right here. So you can see I'm engaging C sharp and I'm pressing, well, I should be pressing the B, but I'm pressing B flat. You can see how they close at the same time when, sorry. C sharp, B, closing both at the same time. Make sense? I mean, it's probably pretty confusing for people who haven't worked on any oboes. Sorry. Okay, finally, you've got the B to bell B flat. So this is my oboe, it's a Fox. It's generally controlled by this screw. Unless this screw is causing problems with your E flat, then you're gonna control it down here by moving, flexing the bell key. On some oboes, you've got a lot more options. We won't get too deep into that, but I mean, some oboes, they actually have this vent key articulates on its own. And so you've got two screws down here. Some of them have two screws up here. It can get pretty crazy. Just know that by the time you work on oboes like that, you've probably got the groundwork to troubleshoot that. So you don't need to worry about learning it right now. So you can see here, I'm pressing the B flat and it's moving lots of stuff. I'm not going to show that again. Okay. So it's important to note that on high-end instruments, there needs to be lost motion between the second B flat lever screw and the E flat body spring. If there's no lost motion here, your E flat is going to be stuck open. Easy peasy. All right. The banana key, you just want to make sure that there's slight lost motion between the banana key and the key, the C key. I don't think I've actually ever used the banana key as a player. You kind of have to use it by using, it's very strange. Again, Eric, have you ever used your banana key?
Not once.
Not once. Nope.
Yeah, no.
I actually have never met an Oboe player that's used it. Just another alternate fingering. And then you get to call it a banana key. So on the oboe, you get to eat bananas and donuts. And if you get into bassoons, you get pancakes. All right, so the left lever. So frankly, I'm not sure why the left lever isn't offered on every oboe that's produced, because it's super important. You basically just need a little bit of lost motion. So I'll let this go back around, but basically it's just a lever. It connects to the F key through this mechanism here. And just a little bit of lost motion, so you ensure that the F is still closing. Oboe students are oftentimes taught that their go-to F should be the forked F, but the forked F is a terrible, terrible key way to play the F. And so I always taught my students, whenever possible, don't use forked F, use your number 1 F, and then the left F just makes difficult passages way easier. And it pretty much reduces the need to use fork F, except in extreme circumstances. So anyway, I believe that all oboes, even student line, should have that option, but they don't. Okay, so if everybody wants to let a read, we can go ahead and play what's on the screen. How's that sound? No, I'm just kidding. Like I said earlier, you've got a play test after the nomenclature on that PDF file. That's actually the play test I got while I was in school. I have never found a better play test. You don't actually have to play the oboe in order to follow that play test, and it takes you through the entire mechanism. It's a great play test. You're free to use it. You're free not to use it, but I love it. Even if you don't even know the fingerings, just get a fingering chart and you can follow that play test. So, any questions about regulation and play test? Talked about it to death. Pretty boring, right? All right, cool. I'll just keep talking at you. That's fine. All right, so common complaints. One common complaint on every level of oboe ever is going to be there's water in the vents, because there's always water in the vents. You remove the pip, and I clean and polish. I clean out the wells, and I reinstall with beeswax. Fun fact on Yamaha student line oboes, they are actually, the well and the pip are one piece. So if you're ever working on a Yamaha student line oboe and the entire well comes out, don't panic. It's designed that way. Otherwise, most oboes, this piece here is pretty tiny, and inside there will be the internal threads, and that's glued in, and it's not really meant to come out. Sometimes it does come out with it, and you get to use all sorts of methods to try and get it apart. You really can't get these out cleanly without a special tool. I can't remember if this is from Allied or Free, but it's good to have. Its only function is to get these out. And when I say seal with wax, I usually try to get the pip part way in, and then I tuck beeswax underneath it, and then I screw it in the rest of the way, and then I heat it up either with a pad cup heater or with a modified split tip soldering gun. Okay, so water in the tone holes. I just remove the keys, clean off the tone holes, clean out the tube, and kind of clean up the pad. And then I usually swab out the bore with something. If it's wood, I'll usually oil the bore, and it's usually enough to redirect the moisture flow. I have heard of some people using Rain-X, but I'm not 100% sure how you're supposed to use that. Larry Mueller was the one that told me about that, and I still have yet to understand how that works. Basically, it just beads up the water and lets it ride out. Like, has anybody ever used Rain-X on their windshield? It's awesome. How it works on an oboe, I don't know. I'm sure it beads up the moisture, but it's probably going to put the moisture somewhere else anyway. Oboe won't play below G. This is what I was talking about before. Always check your F sharp to G sharp regulation. The F sharp is almost always bent down. The reason why is because when these joints are apart, this is just in the middle of nowhere. It's really exposed. Kids put stuff on top of their instrument in their cases all the time. I have had professional players come in with this problem, and I'm like, what happened? I don't know. Like, what did you put on it? Anyway, another common complaint is that the E-flat touch piece is just too low. This is because these levers are just kind of out here floating. So over time, if you've got a heavy player, they're just bending it down, just flex it back up and you're good to go. And that's it. That's all I had for you. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
What's your tool of choice to remove a stuck swab?
Fire. No. I actually, if I've got enough sticking out the bigger side, I'll put that in a vise and I'll twist it out. So it twists and twists and twists until you can just pull it right out. Otherwise, if it's a student line instrument, particularly a student line instrument in the rental fleet, I'm probably taking something that I can pound it out from the top. Because who has time to take out a fiber at a time when you're working on 25 student oboes in a day? But as long as there's a swab sticking out the big side, because it's never going to get stuck in your lower joint. It is always going to get stuck in the upper joint. This is why I always tell students, get a swab with a string on both ends on an oboe. And it cuts this down to not being a problem at all because they can pull it out themselves. The issue with stuck swabs on an oboe is that everybody wants to pull it out the top. It's like, no, just go back the other way and you're fine. That being said, if I can't safely remove it, like when I say I'm going to knock it out from the top, I'm protecting the mouthpiece, the reed receiver, and I'm using something that is as wide, almost as wide as the opening, that top part of the bore, and I am using plastic, never metal. That's really important. And if a few taps don't get it, then you're stuck using a method to get a fiber out at a time. On the oboe, there's really not anything sticking into the bore. Like the clarinet, you can take out the water tubes, but on the oboe, you can't really do that. So it's super fun. Just make your store only sell swabs with the two sides, the two strings. That's how you do it. And I prefer silk swabs over cotton, particularly on oboe because of this. But it doesn't matter what you do. Kids are kids, and when they're learning to play, they're not worried that their oboe swab has 12 knots in it. They just need to get to the next thing they're doing. And the teacher, they're just trying to help. They're just trying to get the swab out, and they're actually just making it worse. Something to remember with swabs, that if you can't pull it out the bottom and you want to tap it from the top, you've got to remove as much of that swab as possible that's sticking out of the top. Otherwise, you could go in at an angle and damage the bore. Ask me how I know that. I've broken a lot of stuff as a technician.
I have, just while we're on the topic of swabs, I know a lot of oboists when I was in school would use feathers. Is that sort of like
sure, yeah, people use feathers all the time. I think they're gross. How are you going to clean a feather? I'm just asking for a friend.
I've always wondered about that feather.
I'm not a big fan of feathers. I have tried them. I don't think they wick away enough of the moisture. Every time I use it, there'd be just as much moisture inside as there was before I used the feather. I did kind of like the feather that I got a feather that was specifically meant for reeds, and I thought that was kind of cool, but it's like a one and done thing, because who wants all that stuff that just got on the feather? I mean, I guess the same can be said about a swab if you don't clean the swab. I like silk swabs. I don't like feathers, but a lot of people use them. Tradition. Do you want me to talk at you guys more? I can probably find things to talk about.
Even if you have questions that aren't oboe related, Annie's a good resource for that too.
I have a question. Do you work on everything, or do you primarily work on oboes and double reeds?
So I went to school at Red Wing. So I'm brass and woodwinds, but for 7.5 years, I was the woodwind specialist and shop manager for a shop in Central Illinois called the Music Shop. So my brass work is probably a little rusty at this point, as maybe my woodwind work too, because now that I work at Yamaha, I really don't do that much repair. I'm learning some electronic repair though, which is interesting. And by interesting, I mean annoying.
I'm
What?
wondering how similar other oboe family members are to the standard oboe in terms of mechanisms.
You know, most of the other, you're talking about like oboe d'amore, English horn, bass oboe, all that good stuff. A lot of the basics are similar, but in a lot of ways, they're actually less complicated. Unless you're working on a historical one, and then they're just.
Do you feel that when players are purchasing the full conservatory system that they're paying a lot of money ultimately for left hand F? Like, what are the essential keys? Because there's a lot of things that just kind of come with full conservatory that I've heard multiple oboists just say, I've never used that.
You might never use it, but you actually benefit from it because there's a lot to be said for added weight and tone quality.
Okay.
But we're getting into physics, and I'm not good at physics. But you know, aside from, you know, wood is an upgrade. When you, part of the benefit, I think, when you're adding key mechanisms is that you're making it easier to play chromatically, and you're giving the player more options, but you're adding weight, and weight on an instrument is oftentimes a very good thing. Maybe not for your carpal tunnel, but it can really improve the tone quality. But this is an area. We're talking about acoustics, and that is definitely not an area of expertise. However, I would strongly recommend, if you're interested in weight being added to instruments and what it does for the instrument, that would be a great question for people like Tomoji. Plus, they just look cooler. Who's coming to the conference?
Woohoo!
I think all of us here.
Awesome. I'll be there.
Yay! I was just gonna ask.
Yep, we're gonna have a bunch of those digital saxophones with us because I think they're kind of weird. If you want to play them, make sure you bring a 4C Yamaha mouthpiece and a reed.
Oh, I have a Yamaha question. What do you think of the Vinovas, specifically the new tenor Vinova?
I don't want to talk about that.
I want to hear about the tenor Vinova actually as well.
I'm also a little curious.
Who doesn't love a casual wind instrument?
What's a Vinova for those?
A Vinova, okay. Well, give me a moment. I'll share my screen again. Just let me get it up. Guys, I did not prepare a Vinova tutorial today. So
Are we going to be sorry that some of us asked this question? That's directed at the students. Just
should I
think it's
explain
a
that?
really
It's a
cool
branch
instrument
baritone.
acoustically.
Right.
It's really cool.
It's okay. So they're called a casual wind instrument. That is apparently pretty big in Japan. They're kind of neat. I've played them. I wouldn't, as a technician, I wouldn't service them in my store. Their price point makes them more like, if they break, they break. In fact, I'm not even 100% sure parts are available, but I can find that out. Here, hold on. Let me share my screen.
My thought with it is that it's a very interesting acoustic concept, and it's
It is.
basically a new kind of wind instrument. And for Yamaha to design and make a new wind instrument, the casual market seems like a much better option than trying to like break into pro markets where there's tons of established tradition and history, and people write for their specific ensembles and don't want to change. So more of a casual instrument seems like a much better way to do it marketing wise.
I'm having some trouble with my Zoom, so you're cutting in and out. So sorry about that. But okay, so here we've got this casual wind instrument thing, and basically it's just the Vinovas. So you can look on our website to get more information. To be honest, I'm not really sure what to say about them. I know that you use saxophone mouthpieces to play them. I think it's largely saxophone fingerings, but they're very big, I think, in the Japanese market. It's fine. It's fun. I mean, like, what's the point of a recorder? If you're not in the Baroque era. It's just something for people to play and have fun with.
To get third graders to bug their parents.
Yeah, it's like a recorder, but it goes instead of like kind of a pretty flute noise.
I mean, we've got some tracks up on the website, usa.yamaha.com. Take a look. The price point is such that you can buy it, have some fun with it. I mean, I'm not sure if anybody's going to be playing it in concert, but some, the promotional videos, it does look like people are having a very good time.
It's
J1.
like
Sorry.
it's like a recorder, but you need a saxophone embouchure. So it's kind of, yeah, you need the saxophone embouchure.
It's kind of a neat design, though.
Hey, J1, you had your hand up, and I wasn't sure if you had a question or not before we got off on this side tangent.
I think that might have been when we were asking who goes to conference.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
Oh,
sure.
yeah, there it is.
I
Thanks.
have a question.
Shoot, already.
I have a quick question. Oftentimes, oboe and bassoon are talked about sort of in the same sentence because
not
they
the
are both
same.
double reed instruments. Is there going to be a whole lot of overlap between what we've learned in oboe? Cool.
Not at all. Not
Cool.
at all. Basically, bassoon, you take all the rules you learned and you throw them away.
Fine with me. That answers the question. I'll take that.
I love a curved tone hole. Have you guys ever seen a curved tone hole on the G sharp, C sharp on a clarinet? It's another good place for a cork pad. It's really the only option.
Cool.
Jessica, do you know what I'm talking about?
Unfortunately.
Cork pad only.
Ooh,
Yeah, bassoons are totally crazy. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jackson.
Oh, no, I was gonna say I have a question. I don't, why do they call it a bis key? Like, where does that word bis come from? Do you have any idea?
Nope.
Okay, cool. Me neither.
Sorry.
I
I
guess it's
don't know.
obvious because I
That
asked
is
the
a
question,
clear gap in my education. Just give me a minute.
but I
Brian.
googled bit.
You know why it's called a bis? No. He doesn't know either, and
I
he's been
go-
in the industry for a long time too. That's my
Isn't-
Yeah.
husband.
I believe in another language that might be the word for B natural or B flat. That might be the same situation where like B natural is H over across the sea in I believe Deutschland or Germany.
I see. Yeah, because I googled bis and it says Bank for International Settlements. I don't think that's really relevant.
Soup key. That's awesome.
My thought is that
Bisque.
on saxophone, it makes B flat, and bis sounds like it's a word for B flat. So I feel like Davis probably is on the right track there.
Also, do you have an opinion on because if I was to ever work on an oboe, I have enough, I can play a chromatic scale on it and that's about it. Do you have an opinion on the Leger reeds? It seems like possibly a good option for someone to just play test because you don't have to wet them.
Yeah,
Although- yeah.
I've heard pretty good things about them. I have no practical experience with them myself. But a friend of mine from repair school, who's also an oboist, said she thought it was better than she expected. So, I mean, if you're working on student line, I'm not using my own reeds to play test a student line oboe. If you want to spend $100 on a Leger reed, that's your call. I'm not going to do that because my stores that I worked for would cover the cost of reeds for their technicians. So I'm not going to buy $100 reed when I can just get some free, emerald reeds to play test a bunch of student line instruments. I will use my own reeds to play test when I work on a professional oboe. But I'm also not the last person play testing a professional oboe. When I work on, and this is true for any client who's a pro or even a college student, I'm never going to be the last one to play test that before it leaves the shop. The player is going to be the last one to play that because you'll find this in your career probably depending on where you go with your career, but there comes a certain point when the player is the final call if the instrument is done and not you. You might have it mechanically correct, but it might not be set up to the way they like it. And so you got to work with what they want. We just did a roundtable for Red Wing and somebody asked something like, how, who teaches you the most stuff now that you're out of school and everything? And honestly, I've learned so much from players. I learned a lot from technicians too, but some of the crazy things that I've learned have come from players. So always listen to the player when they're at a certain level. Students, I mean, you're going to be the end. You're the authority, but for instance, there was a saxophone professor at the U of I that brought his Mark 6 tenor for me to do some work on. I got it all right. I had him play test it, and he's like, "Hey, can you unregulate the bis key?" And I was like, "Yeah, but why? If you don't mind my asking." He's like, "Because I don't play the 1 and 1 B flat, and if I have it unregulated, my altissimo register speaks better."
Mhm.
I had no idea. There was no way for me to know that. I am not a professional saxophone player. I don't play jazz anything. I'm an oboist. So I learned that from him. And then whenever I had a client come in that's like, "Hey, man, I just can't get my altissimo register to speak," and I would ask, "Do you use your 1 and 1 B flat a lot?" Everybody would say no. And if I do, they basically are doing it anyway. They're using their finger to close it anyway. So I was like, "Well, let me make this adjustment for you and see if it works for you." And every time it improved their altissimo register. If I hadn't forced Chip McNeil to play test his saxophone before he left my shop, I never would have known that. And I wouldn't have been able to help several clients afterwards. So listen to your players and try to give them what they want. You'll learn so much.
What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the modern oboe keywork system from both a player's and technician's perspective?
I wouldn't say strengths or weaknesses. I think the oboe is about as good as you can get it. And I mean, if you go back through oboe pedagogy, I mean, you look back at Baroque oboes and then classical oboes and all of that stuff. I mean, there's been a lot of change. And the current oboe we have is the most stable that is available. It is confusing. So I'm not really sure I'm not sure I can answer that. As far as a technician goes, I think the weakness is that a lot of people are just afraid to work on them. And a lot of oboists at a certain point, they kind of shy away from taking it to somebody that's not also a player. That's true on a lot of instruments where they think that a technician has to play the instrument to be a really good technician. That's just not the case, but that is something that a lot of players think.
Yeah, there's actually a really great sax technician in San Francisco, and he's a cello player.
My
to go to
husband's a
that
cello
point.
player, and he fixes band instruments.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. And then also I had a question. Do you think there's merit to using maybe like student level reads when like testing like a rental instrument because it's closer to what the student would play in terms of like,
Yeah, it's also
you know?
cheaper.
Yeah, all right. I was cool.
Yeah.
By the way, like, those of you that are like, "Oh, I want to go get one of those Legier oboe reeds," like, wait till you land a job, because if they sell them at your store, you should be getting a discount on some of that stuff. So don't rush out and buy like a bass clarinet mouthpiece or these kinds of things, because a lot of times, like, they should be providing your reeds for you for clarinet and saxophone. That's what the store should be doing. Don't go out and buy a big box of stuff like that now. Wait till you get a job.
Some places will even buy like nutty mouthpieces. So like I had to work on I had to work on a contra bassoon. And so, they bought me a reed to play test it. Contra bass clarinet, I didn't have a mouthpiece for that. So they bought me the mouthpiece and the reed. It's perfectly fine to own those things. You should at some point, maybe if you work on a lot of ridiculously big instruments, but $100 is a lot to spend on a reed, and I don't even know how long they last. Are they supposedly lasting forever? Because I don't see that being true, and it's just a lot.
I've
I'm
heard
not a
that
big
around
fan
2
of,
years.
and I'm not.
Tops.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of synthetic reeds to begin with. Personally, like I wouldn't. Sorry, I'm missing all this stuff on the. Anyway, do what you want. Spend your money how you want. I wouldn't spend $100 on a Legier. Sorry, I'm reading your comments.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks, Jolene, for finding that.